and welcome to a thrilling semester of Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College. I am Mike Substelny, humbly offering my services as your instructor this term. We're going to have a great time together. We're going to learn a lot about writing computer games and playing computer games and understanding, critically thinking about computer games, and you will, I guarantee, not be sick of computer games by the end of this semester. Couple things to cover. This book is your lab manual, The Game Maker's Apprentice. I expect you to have some version of it. If you're here on campus taking the lab, the software that comes with it will be installed in the lab for you. Otherwise, you should have the disk or use the download link that we will provide in Canvas for you to get at the software. The Game Maker software is free that we're going to be using. You should have the lab manual, Game Maker's Apprentice, some edition of it. It will be essential in this class. Optional in this class is your other textbook, Game Design Workshop. This is the, let's see, this is the second edition. This is the third edition. The first edition is available online for free. I have a link to it, so if you don't purchase this and you enjoy reading an online textbook, that's fine. This book is all about fun. There's not one line of programming in this book. It's all about understanding what makes humans happy and what gives people a fun experience. And we're going to be studying that as our other prong of our attack on this subject this year. We're going to be learning about programming games a little bit, and we're going to be learning about making games fun a little bit, all at the same time, so that by the end of the semester, we should be all pretty good at making a game that's fun out of our imagination. Okay, week one, welcome. Let's have a look at what we're going to be dealing with this semester. Oh my goodness, what have you gotten yourself into? In this class, you should expect to read some books, as we are showing here your lab manual and your textbook on what makes games fun. You should expect to answer some homework questions. There will be homework questions just about every week. You will take some tests and quizzes. There will be a quiz every week, and there will be a midterm and a final exam. You're going to create some games. That's what the lab is all about in this class. And you're going to, believe it or not, play some games. Doggone it, you signed up for a games class. You're going to be compelled to play games whether you like it or not as part of your homework. And there'll be games to play every week in this class. Okay, so you want to be a game designer. What does that mean? Well, once upon a time, students who would come to college in the ivied halls of higher learning wanted sometimes to become the next great novelist. And then, perhaps in the 20th century, they wanted to become movie stars and directors and famous writers. And nowadays, it seems that the kids coming to college want to be game designers, programmers, animators. That's where the passion lies in this generation. Well, let's look at how these dreams compare, the dreams of the novelists, the filmmakers, and the game designers. All right, let's talk about the history of novels as entertainment. Anybody ever heard of The Death of Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory? We have two hands up in the classroom. Awesome, yeah. That's by many considered the first novel published as a novel in the English language, purchased for entertainment, that was popular. And it was in the year 1485, quite some time ago. But most of you have not heard of it, apparently. And I've read this thing. It's not easy to read. It's kind of strange by modern standards, but it's entertainment. Now, how about a novel called Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe from 1719? Bunch more hands are going up. Almost half the class has heard of Robinson Crusoe. All right. This title you probably do know. Now, how about this one? Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen, 1813. Yeah, all the hands are going up. This is being made into all kinds of films these days, over and over again. Films and TV movies and spoofs and all kinds of things out of Pride and Prejudice these days. This one, you definitely know it's from the golden age of the novel, what they call the golden age. And Hollywood itself also had its golden age at some point. And let's talk about when that occurred in a timeline, okay, and compare it to games. The motion picture industry, I'm going to claim, started in 1895 when the Lumiere brothers got people to pay to watch a motion picture. Yeah, there were movies that were able to be made. Moving pictures could be made. The technology, there were people playing around with it, learning what you could do with it. But that was the first time it was a money-making venture. So let's call that when the industry started. And then in 1927, we had a film called The Jazz Singer. Anybody ever heard of The Jazz Singer? One of the great landmark films ever. Yes. And it is a landmark film because of the technology. It was the first talkie. 1927, the first time a movie wasn't silent. The sound was recorded with it. But by 1939, we had a film called Gone with the Wind and another film called The Wizard of Oz. Anybody ever heard of those films? Oh yeah, all the hands going up immediately. You've heard of Gone with the Wind. You've heard of The Wizard of Oz. We're now getting into Hollywood's golden age. How about 1942 when they had films called Casablanca and Citizen Kane? If you take a film appreciation class, they will probably compel you to watch those films, whether you like them or not, although they're all quite good. And you've all heard of them, even though this was a long, long time ago. But The Jazz Singer, the great technological breakthrough, a lot of you haven't heard of. That's okay. Let's now look at computer games. Computer games industry, I'm going to say started in 1971. Yes, there were a lot of computer games before 1971 that you could play on mainframes and various other things, but in 1971, a game called Computer Space was making money. People started paying to play a computer game. And that is when you got your first time you could be a professional in computer games. Well, if you extend forward from 1971 to 2003, which is about the same as 1895 to 1927, you get games called Halo and World of Warcraft coming out around here, which you've probably heard of in your career. But I argue that a century from now, these things may have gone the way of The Jazz Singer. A century from now, people may, the really, really real experts might remember Halo and World of Warcraft. But what about here? 2015 is about where Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz would fall on that timeline. So if you go following the time all the way along, we're just about where the great golden age of computer games might be starting right now. So this means for all of us in this room that one of you might be the one to make the Casablanca of computer games. One of you might be remembered for decades for your creation, because now is the perfect time for it to be created. And so, let's get started. Chapter 1 of your book on what makes things fun talks about the role of the game designer. And this one is an overview of the entire Game Design Workshop book. If you read only one chapter in Game Design Workshop, this should be it. Tells you a lot of useful things. The rest of the book goes into tremendous detail about all these things. We're going to mostly this week cover the role of the game designer. All right, we'll start off, as your book does, by talking about what game designers do not do. Game designers, believe it or not, may not be programmers. But they may be programmers. Game designers may not be digital artists, but they might be artists. Game designers may not compose the music used in games, but they might compose the music. Game designers may not manage the budget for the game, but maybe they do. And game designers might do every one of these or none of these on a game design team. If you're a freelance game designer, you may do all of these things. So what do you do if you're a game designer? Well, I'm sad to tell you, you must play games. Going to have to be a game player if you're going to be a game designer. There's no escaping it. Your prime directive as a game designer is to be an advocate for the player. This will be a quiz question this week. This will be a question on the midterm. This will be a question on the final exam. Please remember that as a game designer, if that is your role on the team, you must be an advocate for the player. Your mission is fun. Okay, as an advocate for the player, what is it that you do? Okay, you, as the game designer, are focusing on the player's experience. Your job is to give that player superior gameplay, the best fun experience you possibly can. And as an advocate for the player, you should not get bogged down in the details, as the artist, the musician, and other people might, or even the writer. You should not fall in love with any part of the game. The art, the music, story, characters, anything like that. You need to be prepared to sacrifice any of those things in the name of the player's experience. You must not lose your objectivity, because if you do lose your objectivity, you could create the worst video game I have ever played in my life. All right, this is such a bizarre example because it had everything going for it, and it's not fun, at least in my opinion. The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring version for the PlayStation 2 that was based on the book, not the one based on the film. The one based on the film was fine. This one based on the book, Tolkien's original book, was the worst video game I've ever played. And we'll talk about why over the course of the next few weeks. But first, let's talk about some more bad games. I invite you to go to YouTube and search for the worst games ever. You will find game players ranting and raving about games that they disliked. And maybe you'll get some insights into why they disliked those games. Many of those games you'll find are based on popular films. The Wizard of Oz is an example. An old Wizard of Oz game. Old Back to the Future game. There's a new one that's pretty good. An old Platoon game. Some really landmark, fantastic films turned into bad games. And we're going to discuss today, on the surface, where they may have gone wrong in creating those games. And I'm going to blame the game designer. By talking about what makes a good game, yes, when you read game reviews, you will have people talking about the arts, the characters, the plot, the fantastic setting of the game. And of course, films and novels have those too. Well, novels have cover art. And we will study things like art, character, plot, setting, and other dramatic elements of games throughout this term. So I will ask rhetorically, did they have good art? Did they have good characters? Did they have a good setting in Lord of the Rings, The Wizard of Oz, Back to the Future, and Platoon? Well, of course they did. These are all classic characters in fantastic settings that people have loved for a long time. So how could you possibly go wrong with all that going for you? Well, What did go wrong? I believe in the case of each of those games, the game designer lost perspective. I believe that the game designer of Back to the Future kind of fell in love with the character of Doc Brown. Or the game designer of Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring kind of fell in love with Frodo Baggins and his home Bag End in the Shire, where all the hobbits lived. Because, boy, does that game go into detail about that. All right, I think there was too much emphasis on the Shire or the wonderful world of Oz in those games, trying to immerse the player in the world more than trying to give the player an interesting thing to do. I think there may have been too much glitzy time travel. There may have been too much fantastic getting lost in the Vietnamese jungle in Platoon. And not enough quality gameplay in the player's experience. The game designer focused on all those things that the artist and the writer and the musician wanted focused on, and didn't focus on what the player would be experiencing during the game. So where does a game designer find quality gameplay? First of all, most important thing, you've got to be a game player. If you've played games and you've had fun with games, you've had some observations of what makes a game fun. We're going to formalize that this semester. As we compel you to play some games, I'm going to ask you to answer some questions. Write some short essay answers about what made that experience good or bad in the game you've just played. And maybe reflect on the characters or the plot or the setting and things like that throughout this semester. You've been playing games all your life. You may not have written a lot of essay questions describing how you were feeling, what you were thinking and experiencing. In this class, you're going to do that. You're also going to be a play tester. You should avail yourself of opportunities to play test games. In this course, you're going to write games, and there will be at least 1 week where you get a chance to play test each other's games and answer questions that you asked each other about your games. They'll either be in the lab or posted online, and you'll get a chance to test. If you've got an opportunity to sign up as a play tester for a real commercial game that's about to be released, I encourage you to try that. Try a game that technologically is functioning, but the game designer doesn't know if it's fun or not. That's what the play tester is for. We'll have an entire week devoted to play testing later in the semester. All right, you should find your passions and stick to them. This is straight out of the textbook, and I hope self-explanatory. If you really don't want to design, and this is a real thing that happened, if you really don't want to design the Barbie fashion designer game, then you should probably not tell the game company that this is your passion and this is the game you want to be developing. And you should develop your skills. And I don't just mean your playing skills, your game designing skills, your self-observation skills as you're playing. Develop the skills for analyzing what you are experiencing every moment while you're playing a game. Let's talk about the game developer's most important skills, especially if you're going to be on a team. You need communication skills. If you don't have good communication skills, you will have a lot of trouble working on a team. Now, if you're working all by yourself, if you're an indie developer, you probably still need some communication skills, but your skills communicating with yourself will become awfully important. You'll have to have good self-awareness in that case. You need to have sensitivity. You need to have some empathy and sympathy for what the player is experiencing and understand the verbal communication and the nonverbal communication that the player is giving you when they are describing what kind of game experience they've had. You need to be good at teamwork, both with the game development team and with your players. Think of your players as being on your team, even if they complain a lot. They want fun. You want to give them fun. And understand the process. Your book describes the process in a couple of different ways in Chapter 1 and then elaborates on it throughout the rest of the book. We're going to gloss over the surface of it just to make a quiz question out of it for you this week and go deeper into it throughout the semester. The game design process described in your book is iterative. It is a repeating cycle that goes over and over again. And there's a 4-step diagram in the book Game Design Workshop shown. It is on page 11 in the first edition, page 15 in the second edition, and 16 in the third edition, and I'm going to show you my version of it in a moment. The 4 steps are to generate ideas, formalize ideas, test ideas, and evaluate the results, and then do it again and again until the game is done. And later in the semester, we're going to talk about making that decision of when the game is done. Okay, so that game design process of generate, formalize, test, and evaluate, shown right here as a circle that would repeat over and over. You're probably cool with the idea of, I know what it means to generate an idea. I may get together with my team, do some brainstorming. Maybe I've already got a nugget of an idea. We put a few ideas together. Maybe write some Post-it notes or do it on a whiteboard. We've got an idea for a game, something that's going to be really cool. And then formalize. Whoa, there's a word you might not quite understand. That means to give some form to the ideas. So, for example, maybe a physical prototype. As we'll talk about later in the semester, maybe you'll get some toys out. In this case, green army men and paper buildings, and set them out, and maybe they represent zombies, or maybe they represent aliens, or whatever, and kind of figure out what the game is going to look like, how the units might move, things like that. You'll give the ideas some form, maybe even a playable form, maybe rolling dice or something like that, just to see how that would work out. And then testing. That would be when you possibly develop a software prototype, maybe in something like Alice or Game Maker, and just to see how it works. Something you can whip together pretty quickly to get a feel for what your ideas would look like in a game. And once you've got that, you evaluate. You turn some people loose playing it. They're not even alpha testers. They're evaluating the idea, not really the final form of the game. You will often do your own evaluating in the initial stages. And then, of course, you will repeat it. You will now generate ideas and formalize those ideas. And eventually, you'll be at this stage with a working alpha of your game. And you'll have real play testers trying to test it, or those would be alpha testers and beta testers. And then when you are beyond the bug-finding version of the game, you'll get to your play testers who are really evaluating the game for its fun level. And we're going to have a good time play testing later in this semester. And so that game design process, there's another version of it in your book. There's a 7-step version given in Game Design Workshop that you can see the pages here, page 11 to 16 in the first edition, 15 to 19 in the second edition, and in the third edition. So they would call it brainstorming, where you would generate your ideas, and the physical prototype, where you get out your toys, your army men, and such like that. You would present to financial backers. We are now getting into the realm of the commercial company developed game. And you would make a software prototype, possibly using a game engine. You would create a design document so that everybody who's on the team would understand what's expected of them. It would describe the artwork that's going to be needed, the music that's going to be used, and all the other things that will be elements that different parts of the team have to contribute. You would put the game into production. This is probably the longest step, the creation of stuff. You would then go into the quality assurance mode. Once your game is out there, you need somebody answering the phone, giving tech support, or the instant messages or emails or something like that. You need to provide quality assurance for your players if you're doing a computer game of some kind. And always, you're the game designer, you are keeping your players in mind throughout all of that, whichever version of the process you might be using. Okay, that's it for this week. Coming up next time, we're going to talk about the structure of games. We're going to compare games to things that aren't games and figure out what makes them different from each other. So, until next week, this is Mike Substelny signing off for Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College.